Welcome to Markigy, the science of marketing strategy, a bi-weekly podcast where all the cool marketers discuss their favorite marketing strategies, study by study. On this show, we feature marketing risk takers who believe long-term wins for the customer equal long-term wins for the business too. How? Human-led marketing, the combination of where science, creativity, and strategy meet, or as we also like to call it, Markigy. Let's break down the marketing trends, myths, and methodologies together. I'm your host, Leanne and Let's go. Good morning. My name is Leanne, and we're here on the Markigy podcast, joined with Paris Childress, who is a performance marketing agency founder. He is a podcast host, ex-Googler, and just incredibly talented. Thank you so much for joining me today. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Leanne. My name is Paris, and I'm a founder and CEO of a digital marketing agency called Hop Online, and we've been around since 2009. We're based in Bulgaria, and I'm not Bulgarian. I'm originally from the US, from New Orleans, but I came out here in 2005, and then a few years after that, launched an agency here. And we primarily serve SaaS, software as a service businesses, with performance marketing, so things like paid search, paid social, SEO, content marketing. And we've got an amazing team, mostly Bulgarians, but a few other non-Bulgarians. And personally, I've been passionate about marketing and digital marketing my whole career, and I always loved to talk shop.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me. So since you're in the paid kind of acquisition mostly area, what do you think the biggest, we're just going to start off strong, right? What are the biggest obstacles that SaaSes have right now in order to acquire customer acquisition in this channel or these channels?
Sure. Mm-hmm. Well, first, if we look at the macroeconomic environment, it's much more challenging now for SaaS companies to raise money at the valuations that they were getting a year to 2 years ago, especially during the pandemic. So there is a lot more pressure from investors and owners to, there's no more growth at all costs like it was. So that means that acquisition marketing now for SaaS companies has to be much more accountable, and it has to show profitability and sustainability. So this is something that's new. And then the SaaS model itself being a recurring revenue model that's based on subscription-based revenue, that also presents a challenge for acquisition marketing, because it's not always clear how much you can afford to pay to acquire a new customer, because you don't know the future value and the future revenue streams from that customer, because you have churn rates and lots of other stuff. You have different pricing and upsell opportunities that may or may not happen over the lifespan of that customer. And it's very difficult to know how much of your acquisition budget you're wasting on low quality acquisitions that might churn very early or might never be upsold. And you might also be missing opportunities to acquire high value customers for the same reason. So you've got the macroeconomic challenges of SaaS companies needing to prove more and more of sustainability and profitability with acquisition marketing, and then the model itself presents challenges for identifying the true CAC, the CAC ceiling, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about how there's more pressure to be efficient with money, one of the first things that come to mind is just that there's kind of almost different brackets of founders, right? There's the really business savvy, serial entrepreneurs almost. And then there's people that are or organizations that are maybe less, that are more focused on the dream, would you say, instead of the profit and loss statement? That's just kind of my personal interpretation. To me, I was never great with, spending money to spend money. I'm very scrappy founder,
Mm-hmm.
startup kind of mentality where every dollar
Mm-hmm.
counts. If it was my money, how would I spend it? But
Yeah.
that also limits the cool stuff you could do. So
Yeah.
hopefully people are able to find a balance.
Yeah. Well, the dream of being a unicorn is unmistakably tantalizing, let's say, because not many people in this world can achieve that. And chasing that oftentimes could lead to maybe not the best long-term decisions for the business, but there is a good chunk, especially of SaaS startups, that if they are entering a new space, creating a new category, they're getting a lot of investor interest, and the valuations are based on their revenue or a revenue multiple. Then those founders, they want to exit and become maybe billionaires. And that means that they've got to grow revenue as fast and furiously as possible, no matter what. And if the investors are valuing them on that revenue, that might not lead to the best decisions on profitability and sustainability, but they might be saying, "Hey, in 5 years, 5 to 10 years, we're out," and that's where we need to get to.
Fair enough. The it's not my problem. So, while we're talking about just how the macroeconomics have changed and kind of the different, almost like overarching strategies to how people present or look at their businesses, what how have the fundamentals in the B2B SaaS marketing, like how has that changed for agencies and for the
Mhm.
organizations that you see?
I think more and more there is an emphasis on identifying, calculating, and predicting lifetime value. Because unlike with e-commerce, where you have a transaction and you can have a pretty concrete return on ad spend based at the transactional level, with SaaS, you really need to be building out cohorts to determine lifetime value, to calculate lifetime value, because that is the metric that really proves that you have a sustainable business. If you can grow and if you can retain customers over several years and build a loyal base of customers who are willing to keep paying those subscription fees and also have some upsell pathways for them. That's the key for, I think, for a sustainable B2B SaaS business. And now in this macro environment, LTV as a KPI is becoming more and more critical, even for investors. And I think also when we go back to the conversation on customer acquisition cost, a lot of investors now are requiring companies to try to maintain a ratio of between LTV and CAC. And the most common one that we see is 3 to 1, which means that you should be acquiring no more than about 1/3 of what your projected LTV is for that customer. I think that's a much more responsible way to grow, other than simply pumping up revenue as fast as possible, because that ensures that you are growing profitably and sustainably.
Yeah, and you could even argue that that supports the, product market fit, right? Because if you don't have a great
Yeah.
fit, then your ratios are just going to be all wonky and
Mhm.
you're going to churn people like crazy.
Yeah.
Uh,
And Leanne, there's another challenge too, that if you're 1 or 2 years in to a new SaaS business, well, you haven't had even your newest, well, I'm sorry, your oldest or some of your first customers haven't aged long enough to really determine what is lifetime value, because maybe you're only in year two, and then the average life would be 5 years or something. And so there you also need to substitute something. And in some cases that would be annual contract value, let's say. And investors that are investing in really early stage startups that won't have access to reliable LTV data, they need to fall back on something else. And I think that is annual contract value in most cases.
yeah, agreed. Because, and even ones that had to pivot sharply during COVID, their previous LTV may not be relevant anymore. And it could lead
Yeah.
them astray if they were, and some of it has rebound by this point. What comes to mind would be like events, and event marketing, right? Because there
Mhm.
was that boom of online digital events, and now people are very eager to go back to in-person events, and
Yep.
so their whole bell curve is quite
Yeah.
quite disrupted. When we talk about coming up with these metrics and the measurability and the length of the organization's history definitely impacts that, but also their ability to figure it out. In the past, I've worked with companies that were the ones that I typically work with are not the more mature ones. They're the starter outers, and they are struggling to just get things organized to make sure that they're measuring accurately these things. Um, Now, where I'm trying to get to with this is that because earlier on, like maybe you're building out the correct workflows in the CRM or making sure you're clean in, clean out data. But when we start to talk about data, is that some of these organizations are too early to even have their own interior data functions. And so, one of the things that you brought up in our conversation outside of this was, the role that data science plays in all of this. Could you talk
Mhm.
a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I think we're now entering a phase of marketing where data science will become more and more integrated into marketing, because what data science can do, well, let's put this in context. Third-party cookies, for those who are not aware, they're due to be phased out by Google and Chrome sometime next year. And Google has made this announcement and has pushed that date out a couple of times. But I'm relatively sure at this point that they've got to deliver on that next year. In the absence of third-party cookies, first-party data, which means that this is the data fully controlled by the brand or the marketer, that's the data that will have to fill in the gaps that are left in the absence of third-party cookies. So companies will need to leverage their first-party data and put that data to use for marketing. And I think that a lot of companies aren't even fully prepared for that near future. So what does that practically mean, and how does data science fit in? Well, let's say if you can use data science and things like machine learning on that first party data, you can do a lot of interesting things. And I'll give you an example, something that we're working on, which is that we are taking clients' first party data, and we're running machine learning modeling on that data to try to predict the lifetime value, the LTV, in around a 7-day window around the acquisition. So take, for example, a SaaS company that funnels people into a free trial or a freemium product-led growth motion. And in those first 7 days, there's a lot of data that we can capture when we acquire that new customer. And then there's also data that we can observe around their behavior and their use of the product. So believe it or not, even in those few days, there's a treasure trove of first-party data that can be put to use, that can be modeled with machine learning and data science in order to predict lifetime value with a pretty high degree of accuracy. And I'm talking about 90+% accuracy. Now, why is that important, and what can you do with it? Well, then you can take that predicted LTV and you can feed it back to Google Ads, which in some cases, that's one major acquisition channel, in the form of an offline conversion. So what you're doing is you're creating your own conversion event using this predicted LTV. And then you're telling Google, now, instead of getting me X number of leads at this fixed price, I want you to maximize the value, or I want you to give me a 3-to-1 ratio or a 300% target ROAS, return on ad spend, against those predicted values that I'm sending back to you. And that is, not only is that going to be a fair substitute for third-party cookies being gone, I think that's going to be a whole level higher than the efficiency and the return, the potential returns that you could get from third-party cookies. I think it's going to be a game changer. And we're still in relatively early stages with this, but that's one example. And there's lots of other examples of what you can do with that data, but a lot of it has to do with data science, really. And that's not something that I'm not by nature, by trade, I'm not a data scientist, but I do know what it can do. And I do think that data scientists are going to move from the traditional roles of being connected with finance or other parts of the business to start working with marketing and first party data.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree stronger with that. I think that one thing that we're going to see in the future is that as people in the cohort, as marketing professionals move up the ranks, is we're going to see a requirement for the technical capabilities to understand what data science can do, what an API can do, what,
Mhm.
understand the nuts and bolts of it in a much more sophisticated manner. And that's one bet that I'm hedging. I've spent some time dedicated to learning more data science and more data analytics because it's just such a useful and necessary thing to understand as you
Mhm.
progress towards leadership. If your CMO doesn't understand how, like, what the capabilities are, they may
Yeah,
miss an opportunity to ask for it. Um,
absolutely. Even at at a simpler level, Leanne, if you're a B2B SaaS company that you think maybe we don't have the size, the ad spend, or the sheer volume of data to do real data science work, even at a minimum, you should be connecting your CRM data to your marketing platforms. You should be sending that data so that you can really tear down that silo, the wall between marketing and sales, and you can make marketing accountable for driving sales pipeline by having flowing your CRM data into platforms like Google Ads. And even that's in some way, it's still kind of connected to data science because Google's own bidding algorithms are driven by data science and machine learning. And when you give better quality data to those algorithms, they will, in return, they'll give you better results. And that's also backed by data science.
yeah, absolutely. I agree 1,000% that you have to work the algorithm instead of letting it work you
Yeah.
because it will. We know
Yeah.
it will. Um,
Yeah.
if given the opportunity, Google, this large corporation, would be more than happy to waste your ad spend, and to a
Yeah.
degree, right? Only enough to annoy you, but not make you quit. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. The old 10 years ago, being a total badass Google Ads expert meant that you were great at working inside of the platform. You could build out, you could do amazing keyword research. You could build out a great structure. You could really engineer success inside of the platform based on the tools and everything that's inside of Google Ads. Well, today, that's not really the case. I think the badass Google Ads expert is the person who can creatively bring the best quality data from outside of the platform into the platform. So it's not really about optimization inside of the platform. It's about the quality of external data that you can bring in and feed into the algorithm and let the algorithm now do the work.
yeah, absolutely. Trying to silo different channels from the rest of the funnel and the rest of your data is a mistake that if you can avoid it, you should. The little asterisk is there's definitely industries where you can't always climb over that wall, right? So, and that's thankfully B2B SaaS has more opportunity to connect to attribute accurately from what sources their revenues come from, which is hugely important. But
Mhm.
there are definitely industries with private information where you can't always get that one-to-one attribution, like this person did this and then now they're
Yeah.
closed. um and that personally grinds my gears because I encounter it, and
Yeah.
it's rough when you're in that situation.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you touched on another big theme here and a big challenge that is not only has it not been solved, but it's about to get much harder after third-party cookies, which is attribution. And I know that there are a lot of software tools out there that try to solve this problem, and some of them do a good job of helping you get a better understanding of it. But I still don't believe any piece of software, starting from Google Analytics and all the other soft attribution software tools, can really show you a true attribution picture. And there's this concept of dark social that's getting more and more buzz. I think that also when third party cookie tracking finally is phased out entirely, whatever attribution abilities exist today are going to be gone. And we're really going to go back to being real marketers and having to uh, trust that we need to invest at every stage of the customer journey in the funnel. And there are some ways that you can get like a qualitative attribution, and some of that is simply by asking. asking the customer, are you aware of our podcast? Are you a frequent reader of our blog? Or how did you even hear about us? Asking these things in surveys or asking them in a sign-up form or something like that. Even that qualitative attribution done with a large enough sample size can give you an indication that, wow, okay, this big investment we've made in running this podcast or in producing high quality blog posts every day or whatever it may be, or these events, things like that. That really is making a difference because people are saying that that's how they have discovered us. And if it wasn't for that initial discovery, they wouldn't have started going down that journey, which eventually led them to buy from us, maybe through a paid search click or something like that. But I think that more and more we're going to have to trust in our intuition for attribution. And that's also going to be, I think that's going to be even more pronounced, let's say, in the post third-party cookie world.
Absolutely. We talk a lot about attribution on this podcast because that's part of the science of it, right? That's where you jump from the creative to the hard numbers, is with, obviously calculating customer lifetime value and attribution and, the efficiency ratio in CAC and all that. Now, so that kind of helps us segue into when is this strategy that, of using data science to calculate the CLTV, when is this strategy maybe not quite the right fit?
Sure. Yeah. Good question. I think it's the right fit only for companies that have, let's say, relatively mature companies that have a good handle on their customer lifetime value. So that means probably at minimum 4 or 5+ years of LTV, cohort-based LTV analysis that groups users most often by time-based cohorts. And so I think the first condition where this wouldn't work is if you are a brand new startup, or maybe you're in year 1, year 2, where your customers have not aged long enough for you to have a good handle on lifetime value. The second is simply the raw amount of data. And we get asked this a lot. What would be the minimum amount of data needed to make this solution work? Well, what Google needs is, Google says they need at least 30 conversions per month. Google states that value-based bidding can work with as little as 30 conversions per month. I don't believe that's enough for this PLTV, this predictive LTV, to really work. This needs, I think, conversion volumes greater than 100 or maybe even in the hundreds per month. And that means, depending on what the cost per conversion is, this could mean significant ad spend. So also, this solution isn't a great fit if you're still strapped with a marketing budget that's, say, I don't know, low 5 figures per month. I think it does require significant ad spend to produce a significant volume of conversions with a critical mass of data to supply the algorithm with. And of course, the more data and the faster that Google can ingest that data, the better it's going to work.
It's always a struggle when ad spend isn't enough to get learning, to get enough results, or to really have some meat there to what you're trying to figure out.
Yeah. And this is another challenge, Leanne, for people that are getting started and maybe they're trying to still nail the product market fit. I believe that 5 to 10 years ago, you could do that with Google Ads at a small scale. You could get away with spending a few thousand per month, and you could get some real value from that, and you could make it work at a small scale. Unfortunately, I don't really believe that's true anymore, because small players are entering into auctions with big players that are outspending them 10 to 1, 50 to 1, 100 to 1. And when you outspend someone at that massive scale, and it's all about algorithms now instead of human engineering in the platforms, then the data advantage that you have by outspending a small competitor is too great to overcome. And so Google Ads and PPC, paid search, is often not the best place to start if you're trying to prove product market fit. You're most likely better off trying to invest in your brand, really, and build a community and grow your organic traffic with SEO and with content marketing, and invest heavily into social media, maybe launch a podcast, do events, those kind of things. Because I do think while the payback is sometimes longer, 6 to 12 plus months, if you enter the shark tank of PPC, and you're going into auctions brand new against entrenched competitors who have been there for years, who have years of historical data behind them, and outspend you 50 to 1, you'll be destroyed, and you'll simply waste, even if it's a few thousand or a few tens of thousands, that'll be totally wasted. And that's another challenge for these early stage companies, because if you don't have the data advantage, you're too early on to be able to use that data to have enough of it. And in the absence of that, I think you have to invest in building your brand.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that fine line between sales-led growth and, marketing-led growth, and where
Mhm.
that can balance out. It's always so hard when you're an early stage startup, but also, I think that this can be applicable, what you just said, to even mature like organizations that maybe are adding a functionality, or they're entering a new space as like an additional offering. And they could be, like maybe even middle-ish, and
Mhm.
maybe they're trying to go up market. Or,
Mhm.
there's a lot of scenarios where they may not have the data that they really need,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
or just leverage.
I think another distinction that is very important here is if you're building a new company or you're in an early stage, are you in the so-called red ocean, where you're entering a very well-established category with already maybe one or two gorillas and a lot of established brands, and your goal is to do something uniquely better and carve out a market share for yourself. It might be small, but still significant if it's a huge category like CRM. If that's your approach, then um, that's a whole different marketing strategy, really, because then I think your goal is you can't really go into those PPC auctions and compete. Um, it's going to be too expensive. Those big players have too much data and too much ad spend, and so there you're communicating how you're taking a problem that people are aware of in an existing category, and you're telling them how you can solve it better or more uniquely. The other scenario would be this so-called the blue ocean, where you are really innovating and you're creating a new category. So you're solving a problem that still most people don't even know they have yet. And there, it's not about saying that you've got a better mousetrap, but it's about convincing people that they have a problem that they might not be aware of, or that the small problem that they think they have is actually bigger and costing them more money than they thought. And there, I'd say, still it's challenging to go in with PPC there, because nobody's searching. If people don't perceive the problem that you solve, then they're not searching for a solution. So the only alternative there is to move to adjacent search intent, where people are looking for something kind of similar. There's a problem that is maybe a few degrees off of the problem that you solve, and you can still get people's attention and get them to click through. But when you're bidding on adjacent intent, you're not really answering the questions and solving the problems of the searcher. And often you are going to also, I think, waste a lot of PPC spend doing that too. So in both scenarios, really, your best first move is to focus on building a brand and communicating either that I've got a better mousetrap than anything else, and or if it's blue ocean, that hey, there's a problem that a lot of you have that you're not really aware of, and this is how much it's costing you, and convincing people of that problem. And then later, if it's blue ocean, if somebody else jumps in and there is a real category that's created and you're the one blazing the trail, then you've got to start sprinting, because then you need to win the category. If it's going to be a Coke and Pepsi 5 years out, and you've got to be Coke or Pepsi, then you might have to spend like mad. And that's when investors will come in and pour tons of money into it and say that this new category that you have created is winnable and it's going to be worth X billion in a few years. And we're willing to invest now to make sure that you're the winner. And you have to do whatever it takes. And there, it might not mean that you have to be profitable all the way to get there. You have to win the category so that in 5 years' time, you're sitting on top of that category, and then you can reap the profits once it has developed.
Or even still exist, right? Because there's always going to be someone with more money that can come in, try to usurp you.
Right. Which is why that you need to be building a brand from day one. If you start, the best example I can think of here is ClickUp. In the first few years of ClickUp's existence, they spent very, very little on paid search. Now today they're spending millions on paid search, but in the early days they were doing this all organically, and they were building their brand, and they were doing things differently, and this paid off for them because they were getting, in the first few years, they were getting maybe 80+% of their acquisitions from non-paid channels. The reason I know this is because I interviewed the now COO of ClickUp maybe a year or so ago on my podcast, and he told me about this journey. When you build up such a strong base, which is based on your brand and building communities, and you get a big percentage of your acquisitions coming from organic or from non-paid channels, then when you later layer on paid on top of that, your blended CAC, meaning your total cost of acquisition, taking into account how much you're paying for paid channels and how much it's affecting your overall acquisition, your blended CAC is much, much lower. And that lower blended CAC becomes a serious competitive advantage against your other competitors that come in right away and put all of their acquisition into paid search.
Absolutely. I love it. And I think what this does is also show your expertise in the area, right? Because it would be really easy for someone who is, you know, acquires their own customers in performance marketing to explain times when it's not the right fit, because it's not always. And I think that
Yeah.
that lends to your credibility, to be honest.
Yeah. It's hard for us now to tell clients that PPC is not going to work for you right now, because everybody still believes that the first thing that you do, the first serious thing you do when you're ready to start spending is Google Ads paid search, because obviously this is going to the bottom of the funnel with the highest intent. And that's where you start, because that's where the quickest return is. In theory, yes, that's true. In practice, though, and we're finding this out the hard way a lot, in practice, not necessarily. Because if you go in with a small budget into a Shark Tank, you will be eaten alive. And if you also go in to paid search, trying to create a new category where nobody's looking for what you do, and all you can do is bid on adjacent search terms, also you'll probably struggle a lot. So I think paid search really comes into the picture best when you have established a very strong foundation around organic and around your brand. And then you layer on top paid search, starting with bidding on your own brand name, which should have a pretty significant search demand by that point.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because it's also about what happens after the click, right? If you don't have the rest of it to support what you're advertising in these channels, then it's just going to fall flat. Like, you're just not going to get the returns. And if you haven't spent the time in developing brand throughout the funnel, demand throughout the funnel, all of these things where you're answering these unmet needs, if you leave gaps there, then you might get a click, but is it going to turn into revenue?
Yeah.
And that's, if it's not turning into
I'll
revenue,
put
why
it
are
this
you
way,
doing
Leanne.
it?
If the paid click is the first time that user ever sees your brand, then you're doing it the wrong way.
Yeah. It leaves me speechless. I'm like, oh yeah, that's definitely the wrong way. Marketing heresy, if it were.
If you get that paid click in and there's already some familiarity, your conversion rate's going to be much higher, and there's this brand bias that's already built in. So what you want to do is you want your paid clicks to come with brand bias.
Yeah.
Because that means that you will have much higher conversion rates, which result in all the great things around better quality scores and lower cost per click, and higher impression share. All those great things fall into place. But if that first paid click comes in ice cold, and that's the first time they ever see or have heard of you, and it's because you haven't done anything else to get your brand out there, then most likely you're playing in the bottom tier of conversion rates. And even if that person converts, they're most likely not going to be the loyal customer, the high LTV customer that you want to get over time.
Yeah. Not to be cliche, but you kind of do get what you pay for in that situation. Um, and like we could go down this whole rabbit hole of branding, because it's one of my favorite things. But let's kind of think about in the future of marketing. Like where do you think the future of marketing is, and where do you think it should be going?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. The future of marketing. I think that really the future of marketing is going to be a scenario where there is no longer a dividing line or a distinction between marketing and sales. I think it's all going to be growth. So I think that the line between marketing and sales, which is already blurry and getting blurrier by the year, will eventually dissolve, and marketing and sales will both be absorbed into growth. And what does that mean? It means that marketing functions of today are going to become more and more accountable for revenue growth. And marketing teams will collaborate more with sales teams. And I think that's great, actually. I still see, and we work with organizations where there's still a very traditional structure where marketing's job is to deliver leads to sales, and then they're done. And sales' job is to take those leads and close them and win them. And I think that separation of church and state, those days are numbered, I think. So the future of marketing is going to be, I'd say, an full integration of marketing and sales absorbed into a growth function, where all the data from sales is freely flowing into marketing. All of marketing's data is also flowing into sales for mutual benefit of both. And this is built around the CRM, by the way. So you look at HubSpot, great example. It started as a marketing automation platform. They added the CRM. Now they pretty much have everything there. But if you look at that, what's now probably the most popular CRM, especially for small businesses and SaaS businesses, that already really exemplifies what we're talking about here. There isn't really a division between sales and marketing. It's one journey. It starts maybe with early touch points and a marketing qualified lead, and then it eventually turns into a closed deal. But there is no one dividing line where suddenly marketing is handing something over to sales, because marketing is seeing that pipeline all the way through to closed revenue, and sales is seeing that pipeline all the way backwards to the first touch point, and they're both helping each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so much comes to mind, like platforms like Gong help demonstrate this. And even you could even argue that marketing goes all the way through to like customer success and evangelism, and getting that, continuing to support getting that LTV and that lower churn. Some of my best friends are in sales, and whenever I've worked with so many sales directors, and I really honestly think that you're right. The partnership between sales and marketing needs to be blurred. There needs to be a frequent exchange of information, and instead of it be internal like infighting, it needs to be a much more community framework of including sales, including the customer, including ops, and not that we all need to like braid each other's hair and sing kumbaya, but we do need to all be aligned, in order to get the best results for everybody. And I think that's part of the shift away from the hard sales practices of
Mhm.
the frequently mentioned car dealerships and into this consultative kind of future, or actually contemporary experience where people want to have access to information. They don't want gatekeepers. They want to feel respected throughout the process.
Yeah.
But that's also my human-centric, customer-centric POV on marketing and sales, is that you just don't be an asshole. It's, kind of the bottom line. Now we're kind of wrapping up on time, but if someone wanted to continue this conversation one-to-one with you, what's the best way for them to connect?
LinkedIn is the best way. Yeah, I practically live in LinkedIn these days. I think a lot of us do. So you can search for me by my name, Paris Childress, or Hop Online is our agency. I have a podcast called Paris Talks Marketing. Any of those routes will take you to me in some form, and let's connect there and start a conversation.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you joining me this morning and sharing all of your amazing insights. For the Markigy podcast, always look us up. Remember to like, subscribe, connect, all of those things. And if anyone has any questions, I would love to hear your feedback. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Leanne. Have a great day.
Thanks. You've been listening to Markigy, the science of marketing strategy. If any of the strategies we talked about today inspired you to learn more, try them. Remember, the perfect strategy doesn't exist, only the one that gets done. Subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast player to make sure that you never miss an episode. Thanks for listening. Until next time.